You think you're free? You're not. You're a slave. You're a slave to your desires, your habits, your stories. You're a slave to loneliness. You're a slave to needing acceptance. You're a slave to who you think you are. You're a slave to your parents. You're a slave to your church or your religious institutions. You're a slave to your job. You're a slave to your so-called friend group. You're a slave to your family members. You're a slave to your achievements. You're a slave to your achievements, to goals that were never even yours. Borrowed dreams. Dreams you borrowed from the society. Dreams you borrowed from your parents. Dreams you inherited. Dreams you inherited from social institutions, from archetypal patterns that were never yours. Dreams you inherited from historical narratives that you adopted based on your socioeconomic group, your cultural group, right? Most folks never break free from the prison of mind, ego, and identity. They never break free from their inherited beliefs and identities. They spend their entire life as a slave, reacting, explaining, blaming, justifying. But there is another way. It's not comfortable. It's not self-improvement, but power, sovereignty, spiritual power, the power to respond and not react, the power to move from clarity, not programming, the power to move from alignment with God or source or the universe, the power to not react based on your conditioning, based on your habits, based on your inherited social structures. What I'm going to break down in this video, mind, ego, and identity, is part of the map to getting there. If you're practicing spirituality and it doesn't give you power, it doesn't give you spiritual power, then just leave. Forget that teaching, drop it. It doesn't matter. First of all, spiritual power is your ability to respond and not react. Essentially, what you do throughout 95% of your day is you react. Information comes in, stimuli comes in, and you react based on your mind, based on your ego, and based on your identity, right? Which is not a response. Response is the opposite of reaction, which is what we want to be doing. Essentially, what it means is that we are a slave to our conditioning. Your ego and your identity and your thinking mind is what conditions you to react. And you've built up these beliefs, these narratives, your identities that all distort reality. And so that whenever you receive stimuli, you habitually react to it based on your conditioning, right? And which means you're a slave to your conditioning, which means you're living 95, honestly, probably 99% of your life, as a slave. You are a slave, period. This is not fun to hear. You know what I'm saying? This is why spirituality is called the warrior's path. This is why it's not fun. This is why people turn away, because it's extremely uncomfortable. Nobody wants to hear they're a slave. Nobody wants to face the music. Nobody wants to actually deal with these facts, but it's the truth. If you haven't really been introduced to many of these concepts, you haven't had some serious dedicated practice to this stuff, you're a slave. Sorry. But the good news is there is a way out. And this is what spiritual power is. Spiritual, right? Like when you think about power, what do you think about? You think about things that will allow you to not be controlled by anyone. When you're being controlled, you don't have power, right? And the opposite, so then having power would mean not being controlled by anything, right? Well, surprise, you can't escape control by God, right? But you want to be controlled by God. You want the divine, divinity, God, source, the universe to flow through you. That's what true spiritual power is. God, source, the supreme creator, the most high, Jehovah, the universe, I don't know, whatever other word you can think. These are just words. You need to understand the associations that you have to everything, including words. When you hear a certain name, when you use a certain word, when you taste a certain flavor, you have a certain experience, you have all these associations that your mind has built, and it blocks you from seeing reality. the word God is just a black box for something that we cannot use words to describe. It's infinitely intelligent. It's beyond our understanding. Sometimes it chooses to distill itself into specific types of containers that appeal to certain people so that we can ground ourselves in a certain understanding in order to achieve a certain end that it wants us to achieve, or to learn a certain lesson that it wants us to learn, right? But you better believe that God is not a man or a gender or a woman. To even truly think that God is something that you could pin down with a word means you've completely missed the point of God, right? So my point isn't to be like, oh, if you think that God is a man or if you think that God is a woman, you're wrong. No, that's not my point at all. The point is that if you take it too seriously, you've missed the point, right? Also, God is love, but love is also much different than what you think it is. Like, love is another black box for something that is very hard to talk about, that can only be directly experienced and directly understood. But because of our conditioning, we've learned to greatly misunderstand what love means. Let's put it this way. If God created everything, God is all, right? God is oneness. God is everything. If God created everything and God is love, then love is also hate. Love is also evil. Love is also violence, right? God is also all those things, right? What does that mean? And that's not a cute little trick I did there, right? I'm trying to collapse the false structures that you've built. I'm trying to break your current limited understanding of reality, your fixation, your identity, your fixed identity that's keeping you from expanding, from seeing reality for what it is, and from understanding truth. In my videos, I'm going to talk about truth a lot, right? Essentially, what I'm trying to do in my videos is get you to understand what truth is. Now, the tricky thing about it is that truth cannot be described with words. Truth can only be pointed at. Even the pointing is very deceiving, right? So, what I'm going to try to do in these videos is sort of introduce topics that are surrounding truth, or introduce topics about truth, and sort of do my best to talk around it, describe it and sort of talk around it. But more importantly, I want to give you the tools to understand truth for yourself. Never listen to anyone that tries to tell you what truth is, right? They're like, this is truth. That you run from that person, Trust the person that gives you the tools to understand truth for yourself. Truth is something that can only be experienced. It's something that can be directly experienced because truth is God. God cannot be taught. God can't be spoken about. God can't be, as soon as I say God, you're thinking about, you have a built association based on your identity, right? You have this association with the word God, and you've already missed the point. You see what I'm trying to say? Now we're starting to get into it. You've already missed the point. Whatever you think God is, it's probably not that. But if you're anything like I was, like you don't understand what God is, and you need to practice techniques that can hollow you out, that can kill your mind, that can bypass it, that can bypass your mind so you can be a channel for source and you can understand what truth is. What I want you to move towards is a model of reality that's more total, that's totality, that's not partial. Because then only once your model for reality is total can you expand to the being that you're supposed to be. And this is what spiritual power is. First is your ability to respond and not react. The second way to define spiritual power is your attunement to the more subtle layers of reality. If you remember in my last video, I described, reality as sort of a pyramid, right? where the gross physical reality, GROSS, right? The things you can see, the things you can touch, like this cell phone case, I don't know, this laptop, this charger, right? Like this is gross physical reality. It's what I'm perceiving with my senses. That's like the lowest dimension on the rung of the ladder, right? And then things move upward. This is one model for it, right? There are more sophisticated models, but the model I'm giving you, this is the model I'm giving you right now, right? Then as you move up, right, it moves towards God, where God is at the top, right? Gross physical reality is at the bottom, right? And then God is at the top. And then you have dimensions of increasing subtlety, where information becomes more complex and more subtle at the same time. But as you move up in dimensional spaces, in realms, causality increases. What that means is actions that take place on higher planes have a trickle-down effect to the lower planes, right? So you shouldn't be paying attention to what's happening on gross physical reality. You should be tuning yourself to these more subtle layers of reality that are getting closer to the God level. Of course, God is like infinite. God is infinite. It's not a pyramid. It's like a pyramid that it's like something that slopes up and asymptotically sort of goes to infinity, right? Because you can't actually God is a point of infinite density, or whatever you would call it. It's not containable. There's no container that can actually contain infinite. There's gross physical reality, and then there's dimensional planes that move closer and closer to God, where perceiving the information on those layers becomes more subtle, and causality becomes more important. So things that happen up here are actually determining what are happening on the layers below it. It's a trickle-down effect. It's a stream, right? And so spiritual power is another way of looking at spiritual power is your ability to tune your perception to the more subtle layers of reality in these higher dimensions, so that you stop paying attention to what's happening on the gross physical. You stop paying attention to the illusion, right? This is called Maya. We live in what's called Maya. I'm sure you've heard this term Maya, M-A-Y-A. Maya is illusion. It's manifest reality. It's gross physical reality. Maya it's the field of appearances, the manifest reality. It's sort of like the game board where consciousness comes to play, learn, interact, and like experience. In my channel, when I say Maya, it's like the game board. It's not an arena to be escaped, right? It's like a multi-dimensional classroom. It's like the most sophisticated classroom you could ever possibly imagine. And it contains all possible experiences within it. And that's the game board where we dwell, and that's where we've come to learn. And so spiritual power is another way of looking at spiritual power is your ability to tune your perception to the more subtle layers of reality in these higher dimensions, so that essentially you stop getting deceived by the illusion, right? You start looking at the undercurrents of things, right? There's undercurrents to everything. The undercurrents are what you need to tune your perception to stop being deceived by the illusion that's happening on the gross physical plane, so you can see the patterns behind everything, right? This is what the alchemists were trying to teach. This is what the hermeticists were trying to teach. That's why they came up with their universal principles, so you can start paying attention to the more subtle patterns of things. That's another way of looking at spiritual power. So the third way of looking at spiritual power is alignment with source, or God, or the universe, whatever you want to call it. Simply put, when you align yourself with source, when you become a channel for source, that's another way of saying it, aligning yourself with source or becoming a channel for source, right? And emptying yourself out so you can be a clear channel for source to flow through you that's power. There's no earthly being that can compete with alignment with source. And there are degrees to alignment with source, right? There are degrees to which your channel can be cleared, right? So yeah, there are, and you better believe that there are people that are channeling dark beings that are not aligned. Let's just say they're not aligned with source, right? So, but spiritual power is true power is being aligned with source, being a channel for source. The fourth way of looking at spiritual power is your ability to remain unmoved in the face of pleasure, pain, gain, loss, right? Again, it's your ability to not react. But it's the reason why I'm bringing up this fourth sort of point is because it's your ability to remain unmoved amidst the cycles of life. And I think when you start looking at it in terms of pleasure, pain, gain or loss, these sort of polarities that you cycle through, it's your ability to remain sort of constant amidst the cycles. It's how to stay in the game. Let's circle back to, the point of this video. So discussing mind, ego, and identity. Why is it important to discuss? Why is it important to know about this, right? Because access to spiritual power is gatekept by mind. Ego and identity are a subset of mind, so I'm just going to talk about mind for right now. Again, access to spiritual power is gatekept by mind, right? So if you want to align yourself with source, if you want to be non-reactive, gaining access to the more subtler gaining access to the more subtle dimensions of reality is gatekept by mind. You cannot perceive sensations outside of this four-dimensional space-time, right? You can't tap into your heart energy, to your intuition, to your really deep levels of intuition until you learn how to effectively bypass mind when you want to, when it's necessary, right? And it takes a tremendous practice, but you can start seeing real results quickly if you practice techniques. So, okay. So let's talk about mind, ego, and identity. So first of all, mind. Mind is the total field of thoughts, emotions, logic, calculations, memory, impressions. Mind is the field of all that movement, all those occurrences, all of that chatter. It's mind, and I don't say the mind. We in spiritual traditions, we don't say the mind. We say mind with a capital M. Mind is all that activity. It's the chatter. It's the constant content. There are some concepts that some Sanskrit words that I want to introduce because I think it helps ground, what I'm trying to deliver, and that's manas, chitta, and buddhi. So these are three types of mind. Manas is the sensory mind. It's what receives information from the senses, like hearing, smelling, seeing, taste, touch, and it reacts based on the sensory information. Chitta is memory, impressions, and it's like the storehouse for sanskaras. Sanskaras are very important to understand. I'm not going to go too deep into them in this video, but they are very important to mention. Sanskaras are the deep grooves left in your subconscious by everything you've ever experienced. It's like a rut. It's like, imagine there's like a rock, and then everything you've ever experienced creates a groove in the rock in a specific pattern, and then whenever water falls in there, it always goes in that specific direction. So it's a collection of habits, beliefs, wounds, and even ancestral programming. It's subtle. Remember these subtle layers of reality I was talking about? These subtle dimensions. Sanskaras starts to get a little bit deeper into the more subtle layers of reality. But a lot of what we're trying to do, again, is understand what these things are so we can not be a slave anymore. So we can stop reacting based on our sanskaras, right? And other things like our beliefs, our narratives, our identity, the different roles we play. Sanskaras are the reason you keep repeating the same pattern even though you know better. So real spiritual work is about understanding these sanskaras and uprooting them so you can, with awareness, so you can live more freely. So the last type of mind that I want to discuss is Buddhi, Buddhi, and that's discriminative intelligence. It's your ability to, it's your power of discernment, your ability to separate, one thing from another, analyze, differentiate, and make decisions on those differentiations, right? So one final note on mind. Most people don't realize that they're always thinking. The majority of people, I would say, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm, saying this based on what my gurus have taught me and based on what I've experienced with myself, and then also just talking to other people. I would say this is me being actually reasonable, being nice. Like 97% of people spend 97 to 99% of their day always in thought. From the time they wake up to the time they go to sleep, and when they're sleeping, when they're in their dreaming, they go from one thought to the next, one thought to the next, one thought to the next. And thought is just one aspect of mind. Remember, mind is a collection of much more than just thoughts. But the good news is that it is possible to train yourself to be aware of the fact that you're always thinking and how to decrease the thoughts. And meditation is what helps with this. So essentially, if you're not an experienced meditator, you don't realize that 99% of your day is just going from one thought to the next, which is why there's this whole movement in the past, like 5 to 8 years of being present, right? It's like, this is why people say you're not present. It's because if you're thinking, it means you're either in the future or you're in the past. And you're spending most of your day in the future or in the past and not being present. If you're in thought, you're in the future, and you're in the past and you're not present. So there's a really big need to, even if you just want on a more practical level, like not even just talking about, emphasizing spiritual power, just like being present, which is spiritual power, but just being able to enjoy your day and be present. Like, first you have to get out of the thinking mind. Last note on mind is important. I'm not the kind of spiritualist that believes in throwing out mind, ego, or identity, right? It's not that these things are bad. First of all, I don't believe in the terms of bad or good, right? Those are black box terms that you've come to misunderstand that distort your view on what reality is. Mind is not bad. Mind is, you need the thinking mind. You need to be able to think. You need to be able to calculate. You need to have buddhi, discernment. You need manas. You need to be able to interpret your sensory perception. You need memories, right? Otherwise, you can't function in Maya, right? Like, mind is your functional interface to Maya. Like, if you can't use mind, it's one of the it is the functional interface to Maya, right? If you can't use mind, then you can't function in Maya. So it's not something to be feared, or it's not something to be hated, you know what I mean? It's just something that you need to understand, but it is controlling you. The idea is to use mind as a tool, not for it to run your life, which for 99% of people is running your life. You're making all your major decisions based on efficiency, not based on your heart, where the model should be that you're making your decisions, you're making your major decision based on your heart, based on your intuition, and you're deploying mind as a tool to be used. So now let's talk about ego. So ego is another interface to Maya. It's another important interface to Maya, right? It's a subroutine, it's a sub-process of the mind, and it's also an important interface, your separate sense of self. If you don't have a separate sense of self, you can't function in Maya. Now there's two different types of ego for intents and purposes of this conversation, right? There is a sense of self that can be removed such that you can still function in Maya, but then there's a sense of self that if you remove, your body dissolves, right? This is This is what the traditions teach, right? Like ego is the main character. It is your sense of, I, like Justin. Justin is a separate individual that it's like the narrator. It's the narrator in first person. It's your separate sense of self from the whole. It's who you call Justin. It's deeper than who you call Justin, actually, because even if you remove your association with your name, you still have a sense of yourself, right? But it is possible to remove the sense of self and it is possible to act and to make decisions and take actions outside of yourself. It's absolutely 100% possible. It's not mystical. It's totally possible. Now, there are certain traditions, right? When spiritual traditions say dissolving the ego, they're talking about dissolving the ego to the extent that you think you are to the extent that you think you're separate from the whole, which is a misalignment with source, right? As soon as you think that you're a separate entity from source, you're no longer aligned with source. I mean, that's the literal definition of misalignment, is to think that you're separate from source. But there are many instances when you start to dive into spiritual traditions where you read about masters that have dissolved sort of the sense of the functional interface underneath your separate sense of self from source, that such that their body dissolves. Like they don't eat. Their fundamental will to sort of persist just leaves. And it's not a depressive thing. It's simply when you're in these deep states of what's called like samadhi, which is like temporary ego dissolution. It's a temporary vanishing of the ego, dissolvement of the ego. But there are masters who've been in like deep states of samadhi, and even that deeper layer of interface with Maya, that sense of self, dissolves, and their body just withers away, and they just, they leave. I'm just mentioning that for viewers that, start to dive into that stuff, and they're curious about like, well, I heard you have to dissolve the ego. No, that's not what I was taught in terms of, again, what I practice is spiritual power to fully integrate with Maya. There are deeper levels that you can ascend to, but that's not stuff that I'm covering in this channel at all. Because I haven't reached those levels yet, right? Nor do I really want to. At least not now. At least not at this time. I care about playing in the playground too much. The playground is too fun for me to want to stop playing. And last is identity. So identity is the role that you adopt at any given moment. So I am X or Y, I'm this race, I have this job, like this is my career, I'm biracial, I'm Black, I'm American, I'm, a North Carolina native, I'm a scientist, I'm an MMA fighter. Yeah, all of those things are but also those are identities of a specific flavor, but there's also identities like I'm always in danger, or I am safe, or I'm a victim. You know what I mean? There's victim identities. There's very sneaky identities. Identity is another interface between you and the world, but it's not fixed like you think it is. The problem is that ego, your sense of self, wants to freeze your identity. It wants to fix it, right? It's very threatening to your ego. Identity, because the thing is when your identity moves, you start to push against the boundaries of your ego, and you start to get a glimpse that it might not actually be real. And the fundamental property of ego is to exist. So anything that threatens its non-existence, it will immediately shut down, it will immediately try to kill, and it treats it like a threat. So, and that's what, and it will cause you to attack yourself, and it'll cause you to attack other people. So that's why when your identity is fluid, you start to get the source code of ego starts to break a little bit, you know what I mean? And you start to brush up against the boundaries of it, and ego's like, oh, nope, I don't like this. So it wants your identity to be fixed, right? So anything that threatens, Justin is an MMA fighter. Anything that makes me feel insecure about that identity, I immediately attack, right? Anything that, okay, I cannot stress this point enough, guys. Everything I'm talking about in this video is super, super, super important, okay? I know I'm talking about it casually, and I'm sort of just like, because I have so much experience with it, right? Like I've been studying this stuff for 12 to 15 years now, like really, really deeply. So I think maybe it can sort of sound flippant, the things that I'm saying. Guys, this is a big deal. Like I'm trying to get you to understand how you can expand yourself, right? Like anything that threatens your identity, you immediately want to attack. This is the cause for like 80 to 90% of problems in the world. It's because our identities are threatened, and so we react habitually. Our ego wants to destroy anything that threatens our identity. So, Justin is black. Anyone who says anything about black people, I'm in the historical Justin when I was a teenager, maybe my early 20s, I would have been like super pissed off, like flying into a rage, would have been thinking about it all day, like regardless of whether it's right or wrong. That's not the point. The point isn't whether this person or this institution or this thing, the point isn't whether they're right or wrong. The point is that they're getting you to react, and you're a slave. That is the whole point. The point is that your identity makes you a slave. Your fixed identity makes you a slave, right? When you take it, either when your identity is fixed or when you take it too seriously, right? Because it doesn't actually exist. Your identity doesn't actually exist. It's just a concept. It's just a concept in your mind, right? I'm not saying that real atrocities aren't committed. That is what I'm saying. I'm saying that all of, like, the majority of the atrocities that are committed, I would say all of them are the result of your identity and your ego, right? Your sense of Justin is separate from the whole, right? Therefore, if I attack you, I'm not harming myself, right? And your fixed identity, which is I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm black, I'm straight, right? So anyone who speaks out against those things, I hate. You're on their team, you know what I mean? You can't possibly understand me. There's an ancient Buddhist parable, and it goes like this. There's a samurai seeking the nature of heaven and hell, and he hears of a master living in a cave that's deep in meditation. He goes on a journey to seek out this master, and he climbs up to the top of a mountain, and he finds this master in a cave. He approaches the master and he says, "Tell me the nature of heaven and hell." And the master's like, "Why would I tell a disgusting, stupid, miserable worm like you?" And the samurai gets so angry that he pulls out his sword, and right when he's about to chop off the master's head, the master says, "That's hell." And the samurai, immediately upon realizing what the master is trying to point out, breaks down and starts crying, and the master says, "That's heaven." And traditionally, right, masters would give that parable to the student and let them chew on it, but I'm going to explain it to you. It's talking about identity. It's showing you how anything that threatens your identity causes you to react and puts you in an emotional state that determines your experience in life. The totality of your experience in life is typically determined by your reaction to how people threaten your identity or your ego, right? Because anything that threatens your identity is threatening to your ego, to your sense of self. Anything that threatens your identity starts to expose that your ego might not be real. Anything that threatens your fixed identity starts to expose that your ego, that your sense of self might not be real. And the fundamental property of ego is to exist. So anything that threatens it is treated as something that needs to immediately be destroyed, right? So, if you're a conservative or a liberal, if you are black, or if you're white, or if you're Asian, or if you are, gay, right? Or you're straight, you know what I mean? Anyone who plays for the opposite team, and says something about your team, right, which your identity is based around, you treat them as a threat, and you have a threat that has to be eliminated, right? Because your identity, your sense of existing as a separate self starts to get the boundaries of that start to get dissolved, and you're not aware of this, right? You're not thinking about it like this. You're just thinking about it as, you're just seeing it as the direct experience of, oh, this person said something about my team, and you just start to get super, super upset. What's actually happening is your ego is threatened. Your sense of self starts to dissolve, and your ego can't have that, because its fundamental property is to exist, and so it reacts in order to keep that fixed identity in place. Now, it's not that identity is wrong. Identity has a purpose. It helps ground us and anchor us to achieve specific ends in Maya. Not only that, but it's great. It adds flavor. It's good to have all these diverse identities. It makes the playground interesting. But if it's determining your emotional state, if it's determining your day-to-day, which for most of us it does, including myself, then it's something that needs to be investigated very closely. And yeah, there are real injustices that are carried out in the name of identity, right? There are real atrocities that have been committed because one team decides that the other team, the existence of team B, if I'm team A, and if I'm team A, the existence of team B is threatening to my identity of being in group A. So, we need to wipe them out, you know what I mean? Or we need to commit violence against them. And I'm not even just talking about physical violence, right? Physical violence is the last layer of violence. But anything that is aggressive, any kind of act of aggression towards team B, right, you can consider violence. So, and there are real atrocities that are carried out under that assumption. But when you start to peel back the layers of your identity, and furthermore, when you start to peel back the layers of your mind and your separate sense of self, and you start to peel back the layers of reality and understand the nature of God, of the universe, you'll see that you're never truly in danger. And if you can learn to not react, and to let Source, let God carry you through these emotionally turbulent times, or these violent times, you will always arrive to a point of safety. That can be incredibly challenging to believe when you're facing the threat of violence. And I'm not necessarily here to convince you per se at this moment that God provides safety, or that Source provides safety. But I do want to introduce these concepts and give you techniques to peel back the layers of reality to discover that safety for yourself. Also, what we're trying to do is stop the chain of reactive causality, right? Newton's 3 laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal opposite reaction, right? We're trying to stop essentially these situations arise from a long chain of karmic events, and then somehow it gets to you, right, through a complex series of interactions. And what most of us do is, because we don't have an understanding of the nature of reality, and we're reacting just strictly based on our conditioning, is we react and then we continue the chain of events, right? Because of our separate sense of self, we don't consider ourselves part of a whole, so we don't have the panoramic vision that we need to not be a slave and to appropriately respond to the situation. So we react, and then we continue the chain of events. We continue the chain of reactive causality. Part of our responsibility as conscious humans is to stop the chain of reactive causality. And you might be like, well, that's not my responsibility. That's because you don't understand reality to the extent that you need to yet. It is your responsibility. You have to accept responsibility. You have to accept the conditions of the game board of Maya. This is why you're here. This is exactly why you're here. If you can learn to become aware of when your identity is threatened, right? And make your identity fluid, then you will have an incredible amount of spiritual power. That's just identity. And then the next stage up is ego, just sort of as a function of understanding your identity. Like I said, you'll brush up against the boundaries of your ego, and you'll start to see that your ego isn't really real. Your ego isn't real either. And when you can dissolve those at will, the amount of power that you'll have access to is, it's unlimited. You'll have direct access to the power of God, right? You'll have direct access to source. That's unlimited power. It's unlimited ability to manifest, if that's what you choose to do at that point. So, the witness and no mind. Let's talk about those, because some of you may have heard those terms, but the witness is very important to discuss, because it's essential in dissolving your identity, in making your identity fluid, and dissolving your ego and bypassing the mind. So the witness is pure consciousness. It's the state of observing the mind. It's what happens if you've ever meditated, when you'll be lost in thought, and all of a sudden you'll realize that you're thinking, and you can see your thought, right? Usually we can't even see that we're thinking. We're just lost in thought. We're lost in a daydream. We're lost in a thought. We're lost in crunching numbers. We're not even aware that we're crunching numbers. We're just doing it mindlessly. And you can have a moment where you actually step back and you become this witness. It's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon. Nobody understands what it is. You can understand what it is for yourself, but you can't explain it. It's phenomenological, right? But it's the state of observing your mind. And in meditation, the goal is to become the witness as much as you possibly can. And the more you practice, the more you will observe your thinking mind. And this is the most, well, I don't want to say it's the most powerful. It depends on how you're wired. Different people are wired differently. For me, this was for like 10 plus years, the most powerful part of my practice was becoming the witness in my meditation practice. This is how I got to understand myself extremely, extremely deeply. And it's very scary, because you can't run from yourself in seated meditation when you become the witness. You have to, when you become the witness, the goal in seated meditation is to give yourself absolutely no distractions. You sit down one place, absolutely still, for a certain amount of time, and you observe your breath. And, eventually, very quickly, you're going to wander into thought. And then at some point, because of the nature of your seated meditation, because you're not doing anything except sitting, you're going to become aware that you're thinking, right? When you force yourself into that state, when you are the witness, whatever is up there in your mind right now, you have to look at. You can't run from it. This is why a lot of people don't like meditation, because it forces you to face the things that you are the most afraid of, right? But it's the only way to true spiritual power. And when you become the witness, you're forced to look at whatever it is that's in your mind at that point. So it takes, it's essentially the act of not lying to yourself. Being the witness is the act of not lying to yourself. And it takes more courage than anything that you'll ever have to do in life. I can say, I know it did for myself, and I know talking to many people that it's the same. But if you can tell yourself the truth about anything, then you'll have access to God. So many people think that they're aligned with God but they're not, because they're lying to themselves. You can't deceive, you can't be in self-deception and be aligned with God. I mean, it's not one or the other, right? It's not like you're either aligned with God or you're not, right? It's not that simple, but right, you can think of it as a spectrum. Like, you are aligned with God to the extent that you're lying to yourself. It doesn't matter how small the lie is. Like, if you're telling yourself a lie about anything, you're moving yourself out of alignment with source, you know? And so really think about that. Think about how deep that goes, and what you're possibly lying to yourself about, which is probably many, 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 many things. Also, I want to briefly speak about the difference between numb detachment, which is dissociation, like psychological dissociation that comes from trauma, right? Being detached and being able to sort of being non-reactive to things that you might witness, and then being the true witness, right? Being a true witness is an alive, aware, receptive, friendly. It has a sort of loving kindness, kind of friendliness to it. It's whereas psychological dissociation is a numb detachment due to trauma. Those are completely different things. So I want to talk about no mind really quickly, which is the state that arises after you've been in deep meditation for some time, right? And, you know, essentially it's when you have no noise from thought. It's when your thoughts disappear, or the space between thoughts, it becomes really, really wide. You have one thought and you don't have another thought for a long period of time. Whatever, you know, I mean, it doesn't matter how long the period of time is, but however long that period of time is the extent to which you're in no mind, right? So, you know, athletes, performers, you know, people in high stakes events or stuff like that, they're in no mind while they're doing those activities, right? So it's nothing mystical. It's just the state that you reach when the noise that comes from mental activity, from mind, dies down, and you can increase the chances of you entering into no mind dramatically by practicing meditation daily and by doing other things. But since we're talking about meditation, that's one way. I briefly want to mention a state called spontaneous right action, which is, it arises from the state of no mind, but it is, you'll hear this referred to in Zen masters talk about spontaneous right action a lot, but it comes from no mind, and it's when intuition and action collapse into a single moment. Again, these things are very hard to describe. It's something you'll have to experience for yourself, but no mind. So let me describe the chain to you. So, because no one ever taught this to me. These are things that I had to sort of put together from these teachings myself, right? So the idea is to dissolve the ego, right? So that you can access, you know, deeper levels of intuition. You can access the more subtle layers of reality, and you can align yourself with source. You do that. One way of doing that is by practicing seated meditation. So you become the witness. You practice becoming the witness as much as possible, right? It's the witness is an emergent phenomenon. It's not something you can force yourself into. It's something that happens when you practice seated meditation. It happens randomly throughout the day, but for most people it doesn't. So you set the conditions for that emergent phenomenon to arise more probabilistically by putting yourself into seated meditation. And then the more the witness occurs, a part of the phenomenon is the more you enter the state of the witness, the more likely the state of the witness is to arise in the future when you're not in seated meditation. And the more the witness arises, the more spontaneously you'll enter into no mind. And the more you enter into no mind, the more you will channel source or nature, whatever you want to call it, and you'll perform what's called spontaneous right action, which is when your intuition and action collapse into a single point. And it's spontaneous and it's instantaneous. So, how to bypass the mind. So, I've mentioned some of these things already, but let's just dive right into the list. So mindfulness meditation, I'm going to do a whole video on this. Maybe I'll do that next. I should do that next. The next video I do will be on mindfulness meditation. So you can get direct, actionable, practical tool for gaining spiritual power. So mindfulness meditation, breath awareness, vipassana, becoming the witness, right? So seated meditation, whether it's, I prefer mindfulness meditation or shamatha as the entry point, which is what I'll talk about in my next video. And that is simply, just to say it quickly right here, it is sitting with your spine straight, mouth closed, breathing normally through your nose. It's not a breath practice. You're not doing Wim Hof breathing, right? Focus on your breathing. Eventually your mind is going to start to drift. Whenever your mind drifts, then you're going to have the witness is going to emerge at some point, right? Because you set the intention to focus on your breath. So at some point you're going to be like, oh shit, I'm supposed to be breathing. And then boom, you're the witness. And you witness what's in your head right at that point. Right when you become aware, you look at your mind. What's in there? What were you thinking? You see it and you acknowledge it simply with a friendly attitude. You're like, oh, okay. See that? You can even say the words when you begin. You can say the word thinking in your head. You say thinking and you acknowledge what it was and you return to your breathing. That's it. It's the most simple instruction you could possibly imagine. It's one of the hardest things you'll probably ever do. Which is why I need to do a whole video on it, because the instruction is extremely simple, but how to deal, the attitude that you need to have when approaching meditation, and how to deal with what arises during meditation, I could do probably like a 10-hour video on that, you know what I mean? So next is sadhana, which is ritual worship. If you practice some form of Hinduism, and I'm just, well, actually not just Hinduism, but the idea of sadhana, which is like some daily ritual worship. For me, it involves prayer, which is another item on this list, prayer, devotional prayer. The sadhana involves meditation. It involves mantra recitation, which is another item on this list. But yeah, so sadhana, mantra recitation, kriya yoga, hatha yoga, pranayama. The next item is devotion and love, and true devotion and true love, which is something that's very foreign in the West. And I don't mean that the East necessarily does all these things better, right? I'm just sort of using the East and the West juxtaposed to sort of illustrate points and make things a bit more clear. But devotional love, true devotion is ego shattering. True devotion is ego shattering. It's mind shattering, and it'll dissolve your ego if it's done properly. But we're terrified of true devotion in the West, right? Like, we're terrified of that. Well, we devote ourselves to money. We devote ourselves to stuff like that, but not true devotion to a higher power. We're terrified of that, right? We think they're madmen. We think they're all insane. You know what I mean? We're like, oh, you God-loving, crazy. To be fair, a lot of people that say they're God-loving are actually ego-loving. Intense, super challenging physical activity. When you're done, you can reach a state of ego death. When you've done something like super challenging, like jujitsu or like a really hard HIIT workout, and you just lay there and your ego just is dissolved. You should pay very close attention to those moments when you're done working out, because you can learn a lot about existence in those moments. So deep questioning into your identity and what you really own. So your identity, Justin is black. What does it mean to be black? What makes a black person? Why was that created? Justin as an MMA fighter, like, what happens if you're not an MMA fighter anymore? Who are you? Who am I if I'm not an MMA fighter? What would I do? Why did I start doing MMA? Why was I drawn to it? Like, and just keep going deep and deep and deep, like as deep as you possibly can with the questions. Like, I started doing MMA because I got bullied, and I hated not having enough power. And I wanted the power, I wanted the confidence and the power that came along with martial arts. Why did you want the confidence and power? Because I hated feeling like I wasn't in control. Why did you feel like you weren't in control? Because I felt like I wasn't in control because whenever people would say things to me, I would react. That's the truth, right? Like someone would say something to me, they would make fun of me or do something, and I didn't feel I couldn't. It would cause all types of emotional turmoil in me, which would make me feel like I wasn't in control. Then the question is, well, why did that cause emotional turmoil? You just keep going into these questions. You can't do it all in one day. Maybe it'll take you months, maybe it'll take you years. Maybe you write down an answer to something and then you come back to it years later and write another, when you have some kind of epiphany. But if you do this level of questioning, you'll start to dissolve your identity and see that it's not real, that these things are made up. So intense edge experiences like skydiving or fighting, like fighting in a cage or racing, doing something like that's pretty dangerous, right? Like, yeah, like those can kill your ego. It'll penetrate through the mind, and it'll dissolve your ego for sure. But you have to be careful with these things. I'm not saying to chase these experiences. If you feel compelled to do it, absolutely 100% chase them. But near-death experiences. There's a reason why people that have had near-death experiences always have a profound transformation, right? Because their ego gets pierced, their sense of self gets destroyed, right? It's such a strong energetic event that it shatters their ego. It breaks their mind. You know what I mean? Sometimes it breaks it too fully. You know what I mean? But for many people, it breaks their ego just enough that they can have a profound transformation. Intense orgasm. That's another death of sorts, right? All of these things that I'm talking about, if you notice, all of these things on the list are death of ego, right? They're sort of death, right? Intense orgasm is a sort of death. Like in order to really, that's why not everyone can have intense orgasms. You know what I mean? Because they can't let go. You have to have an intense orgasm. You have to be able to let go, right? You have to let go of yourself. And when it happens, it's not sometimes like the moment and the experience will prime you for the let go, and sometimes the person already has that ability to let go built into them, right? It's hard to say which one comes first, but the point is that intense orgasm is also ego death. Yeah, so those are just a couple of things. Well, actually, no, those are a lot of things, especially the things that I listed in the beginning. Those are like your primary tools that you're going to use for spirituality, right? Meditation, journaling and identity questioning, mantra recitation, prayer, devotion, intense physical activity, right? These are your tools right here. There's some more that I'm going to put on there that are very, very important, right? Like maybe I should mention this too. So like questioning your beliefs and your narratives. I'm going to make a whole video about this, but this is another super, super important tool to gaining spiritual power. So your beliefs and your narratives, like your belief that you're a victim, your belief that your belief that you can't make money, your belief that you're always broke, your belief that you're not wanted, your belief that you'll never find a romantic partner, your belief that all white people hate black people, all white people are racist, your belief that all black people are act out and ruin neighborhoods, your belief that all women, all good looking, all dimes are gold diggers, all Instagram models are no good, fucking all these guys, I don't know, like whatever, all men, I would rather be in a cave with a bear than a man, you know what I mean? All men are cheaters, abusive. I mean, the list goes on, guys, and you start to see how deep this goes. Your identity is determining, your beliefs are shaping your identity, and your identity is shaping your beliefs. It's like they act as catalysts to each other, right? They're complementary, you know what I mean? And then you have these narratives, right? These storylines that accompany your beliefs and your emotions and these events that happen in your life, you know what I mean? And they're creating this insanity inside of you. They're creating this insanity inside of you. I know, because I've been there, you know what I mean? I've done a lot of work in peeling back these narratives, So yeah, I'm gonna share techniques on that. So one last note before I close this section. Ego. Never doubt the ability of ego to recreate itself. The fundamental property of ego is existence. That means that it will exist at all costs. And it will use anything and everything it possibly can to recreate itself and exist. Existence is its fundamental property. What that means is it's extremely deceitful. It is the greatest deceiver. It is the greatest deceiver in Maya, right? People this is what I believe the Christians meant when they talked about the devil, right? Like, I believe this is the devil. It is the ultimate deceiver. There's nothing more deceptive than your ego. For instance, and I'm going to talk about the trickiest ego. The trickiest way in which ego deceives you is spiritual ego. For instance, it's like your want to dissolve your ego. You wanting to dissolve your ego is another manifestation of ego, right? Like, as soon as you think your work is done, this is another example. As soon as you think your work is done, you're like, all right, did that, like, ego's done, ego's crushed, you know what I mean? Identity crushed, you know what I mean? Beliefs and narratives crushed, you know what I mean? That's your ego at work. That is your sense of self. That is like just raging, and it's just disguising itself. It's just disguising itself really cleverly. So you might be asking, well, how do you beat ego? This is I don't think I can fit this into this video. How to beat ego. That's the problem, is you're trying to beat ego. You can't beat ego. This is one of the paradoxes. This is probably the first real paradox we're coming across in our video. So, paradox. You need to become comfortable with paradox when you start dealing with spirituality, because you're going to encounter it a lot. Matter of fact, if you're not encountering paradox a lot, you're not diving deep enough. Paradox is, so the clinical definition of paradox is, it's the juxtaposition, like two logically irreconcilable. True paradox is two logically irreconcilable ideas. Meaning, you can't use logic to, they're two conflicting ideas, right? Whatever this presupposes is directly conflicting whatever this supposes, right? And you can't logically reconcile them. So when you start diving into spirituality, you're going to come across a lot of paradox. But the spiritual way of understanding paradox is, when you encounter paradox, it means you're brushing up against the edges, the boundaries of reality, the boundaries of Maya. You're brushing up against, like, the source code. The source code of the matrix is failing, right? And that's why it's so important. Paradox. That's why you should be really excited when you encounter paradox, because that means you're getting closer to truth. That's a paradox in and of itself, right? Like, but if you stick around for my content, and you really try to digest things and practice the technique, you'll start to understand. Paradox will start to make sense. Paradox will start to make sense to you, right? So you might be asking, well, how do you beat ego? This is I don't think I can fit this into this video. How to beat ego. That's the problem, is you're trying to beat ego. You can't beat ego. This is one of the paradoxes. This is probably the first real paradox we're coming across in our video. You can't beat ego. Not with that kind of attitude. You can only merge with it. You can only become so friendly. You can only accept it so fully that it ceases to have power. You can only accept it so fully that it ceases to have power, and you start to be able to wield it. And you start to be able to wield it when you want. That's where I'm going to leave it. But just remember that. Never doubt the ability of ego to recreate itself. I want to talk about discomfort and transformation. I mentioned it before, but this is important to emphasize again. Anything that makes you uncomfortable is threatening your identity. which means you need to pay extremely close attention to it, because there is all of your learning is going to come from those moments. Anything that makes you uncomfortable, your boss yelling at you, your partner saying you did something wrong, or someone calling out some aspect of your identity that makes you uncomfortable, anything discomfort is the signal. The point is that you're not going to know what it is, right? You're just going to know that it's uncomfortable. And usually when we feel uncomfortable, we seek to stop that feeling by either avoiding it or confronting it in some kind of way, right? But what I want to challenge you to do is the next time you feel uncomfortable and you get a moment alone or right in that moment, if you can, is sit with it and ask yourself, why am I feeling uncomfortable? Why did this person or this situation or this system or this action make me feel uncomfortable? You're going to start to peel back the layers of your identity, and you're going to start to understand that how these things are getting you to react, and how they're not actually real, and how you're fixating on certain outcomes or expectations, and it's challenging your belief system, it's challenging your reality, and that's why you don't like it. And I can't emphasize this point enough, guys. I can't emphasize this point enough. I can't emphasize how extremely important this point is. Anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, you need to stop and ask yourself, why is this making me uncomfortable? Why is this so serious to me? What part of my identity is this triggering? What part of my belief system is this triggering? Is there a narrative associated with this? Is there an expectation associated with this? Is this going against a desire I have? This is exactly how you start to peel back the layers of your identity, the layers of your sense of self, your ego. This is how you start to understand the field of mental activity that's happening, so you can actually move outside of yourself and gain access to spiritual power. Discomfort is the signal. I really want to, point out a lot of what's happening in today's world with wokeism, right? Men hating women, women hating men, racism, LGBTQ, all these things that people are getting so up in arms over, which I used to get up in arms over too. Now I don't anymore, because I understand how my identity works, and it's not that I don't think that there is real injustice in the world that needs to be solved. It's that I'm not blinded. I'm not blinded by the smokescreen anymore, because this is the problem. This is how they're controlling us, guys. They're putting up a smokescreen. They're getting you to react based on your identity, right? And then they're controlling us, right? They're controlling us. They're making us dance like puppets, and you can't even see it, because you're too busy reacting. You don't know how to not react. That's the point. You can't stop yourself from reacting. You are a slave. You are a slave. The sooner you understand that you're a slave, that it really sinks in. I mean, the few of you out there, some people this is gonna piss off, again, because I'm triggering your identity, right? It's making you uncomfortable, right? As soon as the few people out there that really understand what I'm saying, that you're a slave, you will understand the seriousness of what I'm trying to say. You'll dive into this shit head first. It'll be the only thing you care about, because true power, true sovereignty, true spiritual power, true alignment with God comes when you cannot be controlled by your identity anymore. Think about it, people. So I want to just mention a few things, some core maybe tenets to pay attention to. So this has to do with identity. So your sense of good or bad and right or wrong. You've heard me say this a lot. I don't believe in good or bad or right or wrong. Those concepts are tied closely to your identity. Whatever role you're assuming whatever roles you assume have different interpretations of what good, bad, or right or wrong are. And they're not correct. It's not signal. Good or bad or right or wrong, and they're biasing your reality. So you can think of reality as a pure signal. Like a signal, like a sign function, right? But it's way more complex than a sign. It's infinitely complex. It's the God signal, right? It is God, it's source. You can think of source as an infinitely complex signal that we can't understand with our mind, but we can channel. But what happens is based on our identity, our identities, and our sense of self, our ego, and our mind, the noise created by all the thoughts, we have like thousands, hundreds, probably thousands of filters, right? That the signal passes through these filters, all these thousands of filters, such that by the time it actually hits us, it's distorted, it's noisy, and it's far, far, far from what the true signal is, right? And that's a metaphor, so you can sort of see how what we need to do is use techniques like meditation to remove these filters so that the signal can pass through unimpeded. But your labels of good or bad that come from your conditioning, your beliefs and your narratives and your identity, your labels of good, bad, and right or wrong are preventing you from seeing reality. So you say, oh, that's a bad person. Oh, that's a good person. Oh, that's right. That's wrong. It's not what you think it is, right? You haven't done enough work to actually know what right, wrong, or good and bad are, you know? And I'm not saying that as like, I'm not condemning you at all. I'm not condemning anyone. I don't believe in condemnation. I don't believe in judgment. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm trying to say. I don't believe in any of that stuff. Like, you only judge people because you have a fixed identity and you have a fixed sense of self. You only condemn people because you have a fixed identity and you have a fixed sense of self. Once you step outside of that, there's no room for condemnation. There's no room for judgment. You're only doing that because you judge yourself and you condemn yourself first and foremost. But the point is that if you're deep in this channel already, deep in this video, you're questioning your sense of good or bad and right or wrong. You know what I mean? Which you should be. You absolutely 100% should be. And if you're not questioning your sense of good, bad, or right or wrong, and you haven't done this kind of work, then you're really biasing reality. You're really distorting your lens, and you're not able to live in truth. So when mind quiets and the filters drop, that's what's called silence, right? When the noise of the constant churning of the mind, of these identities and of your fixed sense of self, when it stops, things are quiet, and that's when you can really tune yourself to signal. So I want to quickly give you some useful ways to look at reality. Some useful things that you can remember that maybe you can write down and think about throughout the day, that can sort of help ground you in what reality actually is. So instead of looking at things as good, bad, or right or wrong, think of Newton's 3 laws of motion. So the law of inertia is, 1, an object in motion will stay in motion, or at rest will stay at rest unless acted upon by an outside force. 2 is, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. And 3 is, energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. Right? If you look at reality as a series of as causality, this is how you look at reality, causal reality. Right? There's no good, bad, there's no right or wrong. There's only Newton's 3 laws of motions applied in a spiritual sense. Right? It means everything you do, energy can't be created or destroyed. Every action you take has a ripple effect. You drop a stone in a pond and it ripples outwards, right? Everything you do, this is where the law of karma comes from, people. It's not mystical. It means everything you do is accounted for. Nothing you do happens when you're in Maya, in this playground. Nothing you do happens in a vacuum. Nothing you do happens in a vacuum, And what it means is you can, and when you think about things that way, that, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, energy cannot be created or destroyed, you can replace your idea of good or bad and right or wrong with those notions. So you start applying those laws in a spiritual sense to actions. When someone does something, it's not like, oh, that's bad. You're not going to shove it in this black box of bad and then condemn this person based on some identity you have in your head. You're going to stop and you're actually going to think about it critically. Like, it's not that that's bad. It's that if you do that, this is going to affect this group of people that way, and it's going to affect that group of people that way. And you'd be like, oh, that's a little bit more complicated than I thought. Well, I wonder what made that person do that, right? There must be some causal link in his life. And then you're like, oh, the trauma here. And then you start to build a complete picture of like why people start to do things, instead of being like, oh, that's right, they did the right thing, they did the wrong thing. It's too simplistic. And But again, this requires bravery because it shatters your current, all of these things that I'm talking about in my videos, people, everything that I'm talking about is part of the warrior's path, because when you start to confront your definitions of reality, it's scary. You're like, damn, things don't work in the way that I thought they did. Like, but what model do I turn to? That's what I'm trying to help with here, is like give a more complete model for reality that you can actually feel truly safe in. True safety, not illusory safety, not lying to yourself that you're actually safe, right? Because that's what most people do, is they don't truly feel safe. You can tell because their whole lives are lived in fear. That's why they're judging. That's why they're condemning people. You know what I mean? That's why they're not taking risks, because they're actually deeply afraid, right? And they're lying to themselves with their insurance and their 401k and all these things that they've constructed for themselves to make themselves feel more safe, but actually they're terrified, right? What I'm trying to do in these videos, what I'm trying to do is give you a true model for safety. What does it feel like to be divinely protected, to be truly safe, right? And all these little things that I'm talking about will help to do that. So like, and taking it back to Newton's 3 laws of motion. So it takes courage to apply these laws and start to look at people critically, because when you start to dig things up, you're like, damn, maybe things aren't what I fucking thought they were, man. Like maybe I was wrong. Maybe, like, I guess I was wrong. You know what I mean? Just even thinking maybe I was wrong, that's fucking scary, guys. And I'm saying this because I'm letting you know that you're not alone. I've been there. It's scary, you know what I mean? But for the people that do watch this video, and if you're ever like, damn, this shit is terrifying, reach out to me in the comments or send me an email, like my email or my Instagram or whatever. Just hit me up and be like, yo, I'm thinking about this, but I'm struggling with it. And trust me, I'll relate to you, because whatever it is, I've probably been there in my head. Wherever you're going in your mind, I've been there. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, let's move on. Okay, so lastly, why does all this matter? So this matters because, remember, mind is the guardian at the gateway to access the higher levels, the higher dimensions, right? The more subtle dimensions of reality, where your intuition lives, where your heart energy lives, where your prajna, where your transcendental wisdom lives, where your jyoti. I have a video called Jyoti, right? Like where your jyoti field can really start to expand. You have to be able to move past the mind, right? That's why all this stuff is extremely important. That's why you should care, right? Remember, my channel is about power, Shakti, right? Shakti is what manifests Maya, right? And if you can, Shakti is what created Maya. Maya is Shakti, right? My channel is about power, Shakti. And if you want to start gaining access to Shakti, you need to move past the mind. And I think there are very, very, very few people in the world that can do it without intentionality. The rest of us, 99.999% of us, have to be very intentional about moving past the mind. It takes tremendous practice and discipline, but it's extremely enjoyable, and the power is real. If you want true freedom, right? If you don't want to be a slave anymore, if you want to escape the matrix, if you want your intuition to be razor sharp like a sword, if you want your wisdom to be like a sword, if you want your joy to be like a weapon, right? If you don't want to be controlled, you know what I mean? You have to move past the mind. You have to be extremely intentional about moving past the mind, because that's the gatekeeper to the deeper levels of spiritual power. So that's why you should care. And remember, the reason why Maya is referred to as an illusion is part of the reason is because it's a reminder that the gross physical reality, what you see right? Like, remember, reality is like a pyramid. That's one model for it, right? Gross physical reality is here, God is at the top, and then you move up in where the information becomes more subtle the higher up you go in dimensional reality. But also causality increases. The actions that happen in the more subtle planes have more causal impact on the gross levels of reality. But also time moves slower, right? So the idea is that you want to we're in Maya. We incarnated into Maya, right? The idea isn't to escape Maya. The reason why we incarnated into Maya is because time moves really quickly down here, and we can manifest things really quickly here. Each of us have higher beings inside of us that decided to incarnate into this reality because there are things we want to do here. You know what I mean? But Maya is an illusion. So when we incarnate into this reality, a property of incarnating into this reality is forgetting that you're a higher being, is forgetting everything in these higher dimensions, right? But if you're lucky, if you're watching this video, and if you're so inclined, you can start to tap into you can live in Maya, but you can tap into these higher dimensions, right? Where the power that you access from these upper dimensions has a more causal impact on what happens down here, but time is moving more quickly, so you'll see things manifest more quickly down here. That's what I'm trying to communicate. That's another reason why spiritual power is important, other than just like not being a slave, right? But also like being able to do really cool things in Maya. You know, I know that what I'm saying sounds really far-fetched to some of you. And a lot of the reason why it sounds bizarre is, again, your associations to the words that I'm using, right? But I urge you all to start practicing the techniques that I give and start to see the results for yourself. So just, so another few points as to why this matters and why you should care. When you start moving past mind and dissolving ego, you'll find that your subtle body and your karma start to shift, right? So every time you don't react, the reason why certain things happen in your life is because karma that you've accumulated. Right? Karma is not mystical. Remember Newton's 3 laws of motions. It's just causality. You've done certain things in the past, and now they're coming back to you, right? And then, and also, right? And it's a really complex web of inter-orchestrated people and universe. Like, it's really complex, right? Things are happening, and then you're reacting to it based on your conditioning, based on your habits and your beliefs, your Sanskaras, your identity, and then you're carrying it forward, right? You're reacting to it and you're creating more karma. But whenever something happens in your life and you don't react and you respond accordingly, you respond from source, you align yourself to source and respond, not from the ego mind, but aligned with source, then you don't build any more karma, or you build good karma, right? So when you start to practice these techniques and integrate these teachings, you'll find that your life is just better. It's more beautified. It's more beautiful. It's more peaceful. Your energetic body will also start to shift. People will notice a difference in you. They might say like, oh, like you seem so much more calm, or maybe like you start to develop like some kind of gravity to you, which is another thing I'll talk about, gravity. But if you really want to have impact on people and you really want to be persuasive, you need to start practicing non-reactivity. Also, you'll find that problems resolve themselves without you having to do anything, right? Like nature usually takes care of things for you. You just, the problems that I thought were the biggest things in the world, like I was like, I have no idea how I'm going to get out of this. Like, I have no idea. You know what I mean? When you start to build faith in source and you trust, and you dissolve your ego and you learn how to move past it and respond to situations with wisdom and not react, you'll find that they resolve themselves. A lot of the times wisdom is you not doing anything. You know what I mean? You just chilling out, you'll find that situations resolve themselves. Okay, so I covered a lot in this video. The main takeaways of this video are what spiritual power is, why you should want it, and how to get it, right? That spiritual power is gatekept by your mind. The mind is preventing you access to higher levels of spiritual power. And then essentially breaking down to you what mind, ego, and identity are, and how to become aware and identify them, to help you identify them on the fly, and then also giving you specific techniques, listing specific techniques on how to bypass the mind. And yeah, my next video is going to be on the technique that I started with that I think helped me. Well, one of the techniques I started with that I think helped me the most, which is meditation, mindfulness meditation. And yeah, I think with this video and then a video on meditation, that should be enough to get you started. So I hope you enjoyed. I know this is dense stuff. Yeah, drop a like, subscribe, comment, please ask questions. And, if you don't feel comfortable asking certain questions directly in the channel, then, hit me up on social media or wherever, and, just reach out. I'd love to chat. So thanks. Peace, y'all.